How's it going, everybody? I'm Coach Tickety. In today's video, we're going to be talking about one of the hardest skills that you want to build in a game like Overwatch, awareness. Now, awareness is a pretty complicated topic, so to make things simple, we're just going to define it as your ability to take in information as you're playing and then incorporate all that information into your playmaking ability. So throughout this video, we're going to be talking about some tips that will help you do just that, take in more information and also be smart about your decision making once you have that info. Today, we're going to try something a little bit different with the format. I'm going to be giving you tips from both a beginner and advanced player's perspective. So whether you're just grasping these concepts for the very first time and trying to get down the fundamentals, or whether you've mastered these things and are looking for ways to push them further, there should be some advice here for you either way. And don't forget, if you're looking for even more ways to improve your game, you should head on over to GameLeap.com. Over there, you'll find hundreds of videos with more being added every single week made by our top level coaches. These videos will cover everything from basic fundamentals to in-depth step-by-step hero courses. So no matter what you're looking for, you will find something over there to help you improve your game. So if you're ready to start climbing, click on the links below this video or just head over to GameLeap.com and get your membership started today. If we want to improve our awareness, we first need a fundamental layer of game knowledge that helps us understand what we're looking for in-game. And my tip here is to focus on hero matchups. So unless you very recently just picked up the game, you should have a good layer of understanding about what different heroes do, how they play out on certain maps, where good positions are, all that kind of stuff. Even as a beginner, with all that information, you should be able to understand how your hero matches up against enemy heroes. So you should be able to know who are your biggest threats, who you can poke out at range, who you want to use your cooldowns on, all that kind of stuff. And while we eventually want to be aware of everything going on from every single hero in the game, we want to start building our awareness by putting our focus on our biggest threats. So let's say you're playing a backline hero who's very vulnerable like a Zenyatta. At range, you're doing fine, you can dish out a lot of damage, but if you're playing against characters like a Winston or a Tracer who can dive on top of you, you need to recognize those heroes as some of your biggest threats in the game. So even if we can't keep track of all the chaos going on during a team fight, we should put a lot of attention onto those big threatening members so that we can maintain a safe position that's far enough away from them or that has our flank angles covered or things like that to make sure that we can keep playing the game safely. Let's look at this same example from the other side of things. Let's say you're the one playing Winston going up against an enemy Zenyatta. Now obviously this is a pretty good matchup for you if you can close the distance and get a dive off onto the Zen, but if he's staring at you from across the map, marking you with discords and throwing his balls in your face, then you're probably going to have a hard time closing that distance. So you'll want to avoid Zen's sightlines, make sure you can approach him safely without giving him that obvious advantage. The threat here is Zen's range damage, which Winston doesn't really have any tools to combat. Alright, that was already a good chunk of info, but that's just the beginning. Moving on to a more advanced side of things, once you've already mastered how your hero interacts with all of the enemy team members and how you're identifying your threats and playing around them, your next step is to look at hero matchups at a macro level. So now we're talking team versus team matchups, not just individual heroes. What you're going to be looking for here is what do your 5 heroes as a whole composition present as weaknesses, and what can the enemy team do to take advantage of those weaknesses. So let's say we're playing a composition like Brawl, and to spell it out, let's say we're playing Reinhardt, Mei, Cassidy, Baptiste, and Lucio, just to make things clear. Now, this composition has some pretty obvious strengths with a lot of close range damage and a ton of sustain, but what about weaknesses? A Brawl comp typically suffers around things like long sightlines or high grounds where it's difficult for them to close the distance, or just in general against high mobility characters who can get away from their Brawl since they can only really be in one area of the map at a time. So a smart player will need to make up for these weaknesses. They need to be aware of them, number one, and then they need to position and use their cooldowns accordingly to make sure that they're not presenting too big of a weakness that might lose a team fight. For example, that might look like rotating our Reinhardt and Mei up to a high ground so that they can be relevant against those long-range DPS characters, or it might just look like making sure we don't get split up against characters like a Wrecking Ball or a Tracer, since we lose a lot of our sustain pressure when we're looking in 5 different directions. This probably sounds like it only applies to high-level coordinated teams who are always working together and communicating a bunch, but I promise even at an individual level, this stuff matters a lot because it helps you predict how a team fight will go and helps you find strengths where weaknesses once were. Alright, moving on, my next tip is pretty simple. Look at your teammates more often. This means you should be putting as much, if not more, attention into your team as you put into the enemy team. For a beginner, this usually means putting more of your attention into your tank, or if you're playing tank, it means putting more of your attention into the sight lines of your backliners. This is so important because in Overwatch 2, it's typically the tanks that are choosing where and when an engagement is starting. And in order to get the most value possible during a team fight, we need to start on the same page. So we need to know where the fight is, when it's starting, and then follow it up as quickly as we can. And from a tank's POV, we want to make sure that we have as much information and as many advantages as possible before we start the fight. So we want to make sure our DPS have line of sight to our targets, that our supports are still safe and have cooldowns, all that good stuff. Team fights in Overwatch 2 very quickly devolve into chaos. You're gonna get split off, you're gonna lose a duel, you're gonna get picked. It happens, don't worry about it. That's why we want to put the majority of our attention and focus around awareness before the fight starts. If we can at least start on the same page, that will hopefully set us up for success, even if after the fact we end up taking 5 duels around the map. And for our advanced players who are looking to push this idea even further, of course, we still need to put a lot of attention into our teammates, but here we're not only thinking about our engaged location and timing, but how the team fight is expected to develop. The easy way of thinking about this is to ask yourself if we're starting with an advantage where we're expecting to push and take more space, or are we starting with a disadvantage where we're expected to back up and give up space. We're looking for any kind of advantages that are swinging either way in the pre-fight before that full-on team fight breaks out. Sometimes this is really obvious, like someone will get a pick on either side, or one team will have 5 ultimates to throw on the enemy team and stuff like that, but sometimes it's a lot more subtle, like who has stronger positions, more angles, who's winning out on cooldown trades and stuff like that. The way we want to be thinking about this area is that we're not looking to start a fight right away every single time, we're looking to start a fight with advantage every time. A player who's unaware of these advantages will do things like just run headfirst into every team fight, throw all their cooldowns around, and hope that something sticks. A smarter and more aware player will be doing things like taking fights to take over power positions, making sure they're winning cooldown trades, or at the very least making plans around their ultimate so they find more value with all of these things when the team fight actually breaks out. Another more coachy way of talking about this would be to say that you want to spend more time in neutral or in the pre-fight hunting for those advantages before you take a full-on 5v5. And again, those biggest advantages are going to look like power positions, having more cooldowns than your enemy, or having a better ultimate economy. Then once we've gained that advantage, we should be expecting the enemy to give up space. We should be planning more aggressive pathing, taking over more power positions, and getting more angles around our opponents so that we can keep snowballing these advantages and keep the fight going for longer. Again, on the other side of things, the opposite is also true. If it's the enemy finding better trades or holding down better positions, we shouldn't be expecting to go all in. We should be more ready to give up space and play more defensively just to make sure we can stay safe and then try again later to find those advantages. Alright, so far everything we've talked about is stuff you can be thinking about before a fight even starts, but obviously that's kind of only half, if even half, of the game in Overwatch 2. We also need to be aware and making updated plans as fights are developing. So my next tip is to make sure you understand when you are choosing to extend a fight. So for beginner players, we're looking heavily on every time we choose to use a cooldown or change our position after a fight is started. So we'll obviously have some kind of position and be using our cooldowns right at the start of a fight to try and find value, but then our second use of our cooldowns, or anytime we move away from that position, that's what we're going to call an extension. You should only be looking to take aggressive extensions, by which I mean using cooldowns more aggressively instead of saving them defensively, or taking a new position that creates new angles onto your targets, if you have a very clear macro advantage. And the two things you're going to be looking for here are kills in the kill feed. If we've gotten more eliminations than they have, we can push up aggressively, or ultimates to use. If you've got an ultimate ready to go, or if you see your teammates using theirs, we can also act aggressively with those. The reason we want to do this is because, like I said before, team fighting is chaotic. You never quite know exactly what's going to happen next. So if we develop too aggressively, if we extend too far forward, then we might get picked off ourselves, or we might just trade poorly and cost our team a team fight. Instead, stay patient, keep yourself safe, and save those cooldowns for defensive reactions unless you've got that very clear reason to keep going aggressively. And for our more advanced players, we want to look at all these big indicators like kills and ultimates, of course, if we want to keep up with tempo in a team fight, but we also need to look at these smaller details. So we're going to be looking at smaller details like changes of positioning, when important cooldowns are being used, or even the HP percentages of heroes on both sides. The more information you can keep track of here, the better your decision making will be when it comes to your changes of positioning, how you commit your cooldowns, and just how aggressive you want to be in general. A really important thing to remember here though, especially at a high level of play, is that advantages are only temporary. Cooldowns will come back, damage will get healed up, and positions will be constantly changing. And since that's a lot of information, and it's basically impossible for one person to keep track of everything during a chaotic team fight, a good rule of thumb here is that you only want to force an aggressive extension for about 2 to 3 seconds at a time. extending your aggression any longer than that without being able to find a kill or maybe use an ultimate, and you run the risk of overexposing yourself. It'll be easier for the enemy team to react to you and isolate you, and if you get too tunneled trying to finish off a target in these moments, it's very easy to be caught unaware of all the threats that are lurking around or even behind you. Awareness is so difficult to work on as a skill in Overwatch. You're working with limited information from a first person's perspective, and every game's going to play out differently, so you're going to have to change what you're paying attention to from game to game or even from fight to fight. I hope the advice in this video gives you a few things that you should be paying attention to more often and maybe giving you some steps to help improve your awareness. But keep in mind, this is an open-ended goal. You will never have 100% perfect awareness. We just want to be as aware of as much as possible at any given moment. Don't forget to go check out GameLeap.com. Over there, you can use our hundreds of guides made by top-level coaches to help you improve at any aspect of the game. So whether you're a beginner or you're trying to push to a new peak this season, you'll find something that can help you climb. So head on over to GameLeap.com and get your membership started today. That's going to be all from me today, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.